Welcome to the Cashflow Academy Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner. Great show set up. This is where we make investing simple, and we're going to make entrepreneurship simple today. Have a wonderful guest. We have Scott D Clary with us, and we're going to talk about entrepreneurship, starting a business, starting from square one, some of the traits for success. Remember to like and subscribe, hit your notification bell to get updates when we release new material. And don't forget to drop by yourinvestingclass.com where we have great education, great goodies, and lots of fun stuff there. Scott, first of all, welcome to the program. This is going to be a great interview, and
I appreciate you having me.
I'm excited to learn. So let's just start off here. You're the host of a Success Story podcast, so you get to tell stories about, you interview a lot of people who found success and learn from that. And you also have your own background in business, real estate, venture capital. So let's just start by introducing you to the listeners and tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. So I appreciate you having me on. So thank you very much. It's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm also a kindred spirit, a fellow podcaster, and that's sort of where I spend most of my time now. My background's in tech. I've also invested in a variety of different things, some successfully, some not so successfully, as most people who are probably listening to this podcast can relate to. I think that you mentioned something that's interesting. You said, "Well, this is the Cashflow Academy podcast. We're focusing on teaching you about investing and obviously cash flow and finding ways to make money." But I think that people that are interested in investing are inherently entrepreneurial. They are trying to find ways to make money, secure their future, secure freedom in a way that is maybe a little bit outside the way that our education system or even our parents have taught us, right? So people are looking for new ways to do things to make money to create wealth. So I think that entrepreneurship and investing are two sides of the same coin. I think that people are usually interested in both. And if you aren't interested in entrepreneurship, you should at least be a little bit, because it's going to massively inform your investment decisions if you go into certain categories, because you'll be betting on entrepreneurs. So my background, I started off in tech from a very young age, actually from a very risk adverse family. So going into tech was a little bit of a stretch, but um, I always consider myself a little bit of like a black sheep in my family, because my parents, my dad worked for government, my mom worked for universities, and I decided to go into tech. It's still 9 to 5, but that was still a little bit outside the norm for coming from my family. But I enjoyed it a lot, and I was good at tech sales, and I made a lot of money, and I sort of spent a lot of my early career in tech. Then I moved in. Well, the sort of light bulb moment for me when I understood equity and ownership and entrepreneurship is when I moved from one very large company. It was a company called Bell Canada, which is like one of AT&T, Verizon
Yeah.
size company in Canada for telecom. Moved into a smaller company that was also in telecom, tech, IT, that was acquired by private equity. And I saw that transaction play out. And in my mind, I'm like, wow, if I could only have had a piece of this this company, look at what
Yeah.
kind of check I'd be getting. And that pushed me down the rabbit hole of entrepreneurship, starting something from scratch, taking equity position, ownership, all of it. I found it so exciting, super high risk, but also at the time in my career, I was young, and that season of my life, I was okay with that type of risk. And I think that there's a lot of parallels between career risk and the season of your life that you're in and how much risk you want to put into your career working in a startup, as well as investment risk. I mean, if you are looking to invest, you all have risk profiles, and you are trying to figure out what season of your life you are in and how that ties into your personal risk profile. So a lot of
Yeah.
parallels between entrepreneurship and investment. Um, Anyways, so sort of dove into startup land, had a lot of failures. Tried to do consulting work for startups, taking equity positions. I tried to start a couple of my own companies. There was one that was successful where I joined a company because I'm on the sales and marketing side. That's sort of been my forte my whole career. I joined a company, helped them scale up, helped them get acquired, and that was a great success. And that was sort of my entire career summed up in about a minute and a half.
That's pretty
But
good.
after that, that's when my investment journey started, because I now had a little bit of money to play with. And I think like most entrepreneurs, once they've achieved some level of success, or even most people that have achieved some success in their career, they sometimes equate their operational success in companies to some sort of proficiency in investing, which is not the case. Just because you built one company or you know how to build a company or you know how to sell a product does not mean that you're going to be a great investor. And I think that that's a journey that a lot of people go on, especially exited entrepreneurs. They go on that journey and they try and figure out, okay, what's next? Do I start another company? How do I make my money work for me? Do I do the VC thing? Do I do the angel thing? Do I put money into real estate? Do I put money into private equity? I've basically tried all of it to some degree, and we can talk about what I like and what I don't like about different types of investment categories. But yeah, that was sort of my journey. So it was employee to operator, entrepreneur to investor, and um, and now I podcast, invest, still mentor companies, and I love it. I love the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I love the investment ecosystem, because there is never a day that is boring. So that's
Boy,
that's
that's
all
for
I can say
sure.
about that.
So I often catch myself maybe saying this too often. Maybe the listeners tire of it, but I think it bears repeating in every conversation. Is there's a when you talk about moving from from employee to being an entrepreneur and starting up
Mhm.
a business or investing, either one. There's a I often say that the moment you make that choice, what you've really done is you've embarked on a journey of personal development.
Yeah.
And often in a a podcast like this one, I think listeners are craving practical how-tos, step A, like a recipe for baking cookies, step A,
Yeah.
step B, this is what you do, and it's great. But I don't know anyone. We were talking before we went on the air, right, so as it is. And it was funny because you said, "Yeah, I've had enough mistakes. I could teach you a lot of stuff from the mistakes I made." And I thought, gee, I look at the businesses I started and failed in. And it was
Mhm.
so interesting in your story as I was listening to tell your story, you said, "Yeah, I did some stuff and failed." And then you moved on. It was kind of a shrug of the shoulders. And that idea of failure and what it takes emotionally, mentally, and the toughness, frankly, that it takes to move on. I don't think people realize that, you're just like all the other entrepreneurs, myself too. Yeah, I had some failures, and then you move on to the other stuff. But those failures, when you're in the middle of them, and the blood and the sweat and the tears and the
Mhm.
dragons you're slaying. Talk a little bit about before we get into practicality of maybe some ideas and things to think about in
Yeah.
practice in starting a business, how to type stuff. Talk about that. I mean, did you find that for me, investing and especially entrepreneurship, it basically was able to just immediately pick out huge weaknesses I had and put them on display for the world to see. It had a way of rooting out. I had some strengths. I wasn't a complete idiot, but I was close because it just pinpointed areas where I didn't know ignorance, places I didn't know what
Yeah.
I was doing. Also, just resilience and dealing with people and failure and betrayal and everything else. Talk a little bit about that if you would.
Yeah. I think that so first of all, failure is a prerequisite to whatever your definition of success is. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you look at or which entrepreneur you look up to or which investor you look up to. They've all failed a million times. I think that what has allowed me to fail repeatedly, I mean, you're right. When you're going through it, it sucks. But I've never two thoughts. I've never completely attached my identity and my self-worth to the thing that I'm building or the thing that I'm investing in. And I've also always learned to bet on myself. Those are two, I think, very important mindsets that I think can be taught to a degree, but it's something that I've had to work on and something that hindsight is 2020 looking back. Those two mindsets have served me probably more than any other. Because if I attach my whole identity to a business and it fails, I feel like I failed as a person, and that will have more of a negative impact on the next thing that I do than just the fact that this particular business failed or I lost X amount of dollars on this venture or this startup that I put money into. So I try to not attach my personal identity to a failure because I truly do believe as long as I'm breathing on this planet, I have another chance of being successful at the next thing. And
I
the
think,
second thing, yeah,
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry.
No, I
No,
didn't mean to cut you
I
off.
was gonna mention the second idea just quickly. It's true belief in myself. So there's a concept called a locus of control, and what that concept is teaching is: do you have an internal locus of control or an external locus of control? Do you believe that the world happens to you or you happen to the world? Do you have self-agency in your decision? And I believe that when I bet on myself, I have an internal locus of control, meaning that I believe that if I want something to happen, it is on me. I have extreme ownership. I have extreme self-agency in that situation. And if something doesn't work, I'm not going to attach it to my identity, but I do take ownership for the failure. But I also know that any success is also because of me, and I can trust myself to figure out that problem going forward. So those two ideas have
Yeah.
really just helped me get through any failure. I think those are probably the two most important concepts that I've internalized.
I really hope that I'm going to share what I learned from that in listening to you. And I hope people don't miss what I think you said. As an athlete, even though I don't, I was never a professional athlete, but I was able to play um Division I basketball in college a little bit. I wasn't even a standout athlete, but I'll tell you this, a loss of a game, I didn't say, well, I'm no longer a good basketball player because I lost the game. I did
Mm,
not let a loss uh, at any time that I can remember translate into my own identity as a player. Those were separate things.
mm,
And the loss of a business is kind of like that. It's a long game, and sometimes it hurts, and losing hurts, but it doesn't speak to who you are inside necessarily. But I'll tell you the other thing you said that I really liked, particularly in my home country, the United States, is the locus of control. We just finished. If you're in Canada and you're looking over the border at the United States, you just got to grab a bunch of popcorn and watch the show and just shake your
Wait,
head and
well,
say, how
I'm
can this
Canadian, but
be?
I'm in Miami right now. So,
Right. Well, but
yeah,
it's got to be an interesting perspective,
yeah,
right, from wherever you are. And so when you talk about the locus of control, politics and politicians want to frame every election. I put this in chat GTP and said, give me all the matchups in US history, all of them,
hmm,
every single election. And then I said, find me, I had to talk about what they said. And without exception, even in, guys like we're saying, the guy run against Thomas Jefferson, he says, this guy's an existential threat to to the future of the country. In other words, they want to take the locus of control and say it's about who you vote for,
yeah,
and it's an external thing, and if we get the right person in the White House, things are going to be fine. But boy, if we don't, your life
yeah,
is going to, and that locus of control moves from what I can do in my own personal policy, and that's what politics comes from, is policy. I have a personal monetary policy. I have
yeah,
a personal fiscal policy. I have a personal, rules and standards that I don't bow to rules. I raise to standards in my home. And those rules and that control is inside my house and inside of my mind and my heart. It's got very little to do when I wake up in the morning of who the hell the president is.
amen.
They've never bought me an asset. They've never paid a bill of mine. They really have a tremendously limited impact on my life. Warren Buffett has invested since 1940, whatever, and he's always been in stocks. He says half the time I've had a president I didn't vote for, but it's never kept me out of stocks. So
Yeah,
that locus of control that you said, that's a mindset that is so rare. And I'll even add to that, risk is related to control.
hmm,
The more control I have over a system, the less risk I take, the less control I have, the outcome will be what it is externally. So That idea, I love that phrase. The locus of control, is it within you, or is it within your boss, or is it within your
Yeah.
wife or your children or your spouse, or is it with your government? And
Yeah.
what a great diamond to I don't know that people can hear that. But if they think they're locus of control, I mean, I was watching, not to be too verbose on this, but I was on the Twitter feed and someone was making fun of people that were that their candidate had lost and they were in hysterics, and they're making fun of these people, and of course it's emotional. But the reason they were in hysteric is their locus of control is there, and
Yeah.
they felt they had no control over things. They felt the frustration where maybe you think, I can get up tomorrow morning and I can learn anything I want to learn with a Google. I can start a
Mhm.
journey. I can start a business. I can buy a company. I can develop myself. And I love that thought. When we come back from break, I'm going to talk to you. We're going to move into more practicum. We'll talk about, the meaning of success. You do have the Success Story podcast. So I love to speak about the meaning of success. There's a lot of definitions, which is different than a meaning, but we'll talk about that when we come back, speaking with Scott D Clary.
They make different topics that could be complex very simple. You're going to learn at your own pace. The more that you want to learn, the more you can learn. It's been amazing for me personally, as well as me taking the subject matter and teaching it to my children. They're all very passionate about what it is they're teaching and how they teach it, and it just comes across as so genuine. If it's something that you're interested in, then certainly they're the best teachers that I've run across in terms of teaching fiscal education.
Welcome back to the Cashflow Academy Podcast. This is where we make all things investing simple. We're speaking about investing and entrepreneurship with the host of the Success Stories podcast, Scott D Clary. Welcome back, and looking to dive into the next half here. Tell me about this. If a person says, "I want to start a business," they come to you and say, "I'm sick of my 9 to 5. I live in the United States. I have the freedom to start a business today. I want to start." Where would you tell them to begin?
I think that, first of all, they have to understand that starting a business is inherently risky. So we're going to try and de-risk it as much as possible, but it is inherently risky. So they have to understand before they even decide to start a business, where is their personal North Star? So is it focused on spending as much time with my kids and my wife or my husband as possible? Or am I 25 and I literally am just going to the bars on the weekend, so I have unlimited free time and I can invest 80 hours a week? Because
Yeah.
I think that when you start a business, you do have to understand your personal North Star, and you have to understand, we mentioned this before, the season of the life that you're in. And there's different ways to start businesses and be entrepreneurs in different seasons, but know that it's going to be a lot of work and there's going to be a risk associated with it regardless. Now, that being said, you can look at a couple different frameworks for figuring out what kind of business you should start. You can look at Ikigai or some sort of Venn diagram of your passions, what the world needs, what you're good at, and what you can monetize, which is just a really great framework to start. And then once you figure out what that thing is, I'm a big fan of, again, a couple different mindsets towards starting a business, because mindsets are what will make or break a business. The tactics are very easy to find. I can figure out how to run a Facebook ad set, getting a 3x ROAS by going to some YouTube video, or I can figure out how to hire the best employee, or I can go to Upwork or TopTal and tap into the gig economy, or I can figure out how to find product market fit and post great content on social and build a funnel. I can figure out the tactics. Mindset's very important, because mindset will replace the motivation or the fire that you first get when you want to start a business, which will 11 out of 10 times fizzle out in about month 2 or 3 or 4, because shit's going to hit the fan. It's going to get difficult.
Yeah.
So a couple different mindset ideas. First of all, you've done your Venn diagram of what you should actually think of building. I love the idea of, and I'll just rip through them and then you tell me what you want to focus on. I love the idea of building your business between 5 and 9, and you have your 9 to 5 W-2, and then you build your business between 5 to 9 and on the weekend. So you de-risk. You're not going all in immediately. I love the idea of reverse engineering success. So looking at what someone else has built and reverse engineering how they've built what they've built. Look at somebody who's built a business that is a year ahead of you. That's the same type of business, same type of product. And then you can reverse engineer the steps they use to take that to market so you can learn from other people. I love the idea of commit to something for 10 years, meaning that if you are going to build this thing, assume it's going to take longer, more time, more energy, more money than you think it's going to take. So don't quit your job too soon. Make sure that not only have you built the financial structure and systems in place to allow yourself to afford to build this thing, but also the time commitments it's going to take. So if you assume something's going to take 10 years of your life, okay, then maybe I don't want to try and speed run building a business and try and cram it all into 6 months. Maybe I can work on it for 10 hours a week. That's fine. Just find a way to play the long game and do it for an unreasonable amount of time. And I think that between all of these ideas, if you reverse engineer success, if you build it in your downtime, if you focus on committing to this thing for 10 years, and you have this Venn diagram of what to take to market based on, again, your skill set, your passion, what the market needs, what you can monetize, I think it's a very good recipe for success, a very good practical way to at least start. I think that's a probably healthier way to start than most entrepreneurs start. So those ideas alone, I think, will be quite good for somebody to start with.
That's some really fantastic stuff, particularly the mindset of identifying skills and passion. And that combination is a really interesting combination because the greatest entrepreneurs don't stop. Buffett and the late Charlie Munger, these guys are in their 90s and they get up in the morning and they could go sit at the pool. They could put a drink with an umbrella in it. They could travel. They could do anything they wanted to do. And the thing that they want to do more than anything else is go to their office and go to work. Yeah. And so the idea that people say, well, I want to be an entrepreneur, so I own my own business and I don't have to work anymore. Well, first of all, when you start, you don't own it. It owns you, for sure. The amount of work that I really appreciate that, because the amount of work it takes to do this stuff, you have to enjoy it because you are going to work weekends and you are going to work, especially in the early times when you get that thing going. And to me, there's certain, if you don't know what your skills are, there's a great book called The Happiness Hypothesis, and it talks about flow state, where flow state is where you have something really legitimately challenging, and yet, it's not easy to do, and yet you are equal to that task and you're performing it well. And you're just feeling this type of, it's a brand of happiness that is really different than love or even achievement, because you're just in the middle of it. It's a lot like in athletics when you're just in the zone. And if you can find that and get into that, that's fascinating stuff. The other thing that really is interesting, where you said commit to 10 years. And that's an interesting thing. I think maybe one of the hardest things, I think it's easier as an investor, and I think it's very difficult as an entrepreneur. I think it's different. Is as an investor, I can pull the plug pretty easy and sell a stock. Mm-hmm. That's not too tough to do, because you can look at it and say, there's just better opportunities over here. But man, when you put your blood and sweat and heart, you don't know if you're 3 feet from gold. And I think the hardest thing, one among top 10 list of being an entrepreneur, is when I've been in businesses that have failed, when to pull the plug or when to say, never, never, never give up. Never, never, never give up. So there's times to divorce. Like there's marriages that are bad and you should divorce. No,
I agree.
Commit till death do you part.
You need to know your KPIs. You need to know your KPIs for success. That's the thing. Yes, I do agree. Just doing the same thing for 10 years and never pivoting and never changing and never iterating and never learning. And like what Kevin O'Leary says is that there's a time when you take your business behind the barn and you shoot it. That's valid. But I think that more people pull the plug for the wrong reasons. That's all I'm saying. Yes, there is a time to pull the plug on it, but I think that going into it with the mindset of I'm going to commit 10 years of my life to this thing, it sets you up financially, energy, the amount of energy you have to commit to it, the amount of time, it sort of creates this perfect framework for you to understand what it's going to take. Because if you say
Yeah,
that to yourself, even if you don't commit to it for 10 years, or even if it's successful after 3 years, good for you. Or if you kill it after 2 years, the point is you understand what most businesses that are successful, they do take around 6 to 10 years to be truly
for sure.
successful. Not just a high paying job that takes twice as much of your time. But
Yeah, there's the key performance indicators you mentioned. That's a huge deal because
yeah,
as I've grown in business, those become more and more important to business to know how to tweak them, to
yeah,
get people around you that know how to tweak them well,
yeah,
to try not to do the very. It's not hard for me. I think it'd be hard for some people, but this comes very easy to me. Not to be the smartest person in the room. That's just been natural for me easily, but you got to have a great team to do this. Let's pivot a little bit to this. Great podcast, Scott. Great insights. You can tell pretty quickly when someone has really been there and when they haven't. Um, let's talk a little bit about the meaning of success. You have a
sure.
podcast where you talk about success stories and the success stories. And I'll throw this first. Let's do a definition. I don't know if definition mean the same, but what would you say if I say define what is success?
If I was going to define success based on all the conversations that I've had over the past now 6 years, it's been a minute. Wow. Um, time flies. But if I
Yeah,
was going to define success, it would probably be one word to be freedom. That's what people define success as. It is freedom. It is not a financial number because most people don't actually need as much money as they think they do to live the lifestyle that they've imagined and dreamed of. It's not accolades, it's not notoriety. It's usually it's being around people that love you, doing whatever you want to do with no one telling you what to do. And I think that that's the definition of freedom. And some people it skews more towards work because they enjoy it. Some people it skews more towards traveling the world. Some people it skews more towards being super present with their family and their spouse. But it's freedom at the end of the day. And it usually is actually, ironically enough, never directly defined by financial wealth or some sort of amount of money made. That's just a precursor for freedom.
yeah, I'd have to agree that there's a threshold, I believe, where there's a diminishing return in terms of quality of life after freedom's been achieved. In other
Mhm.
words, let's say you get to a point where you can pretty much do what you want to do. You wake up in the morning and you're doing what you want to do. Um, so then maybe you buy a Ferrari, uh, and then maybe you buy a Lamborghini, and then maybe you buy something else. And I just really feel that the returns on a bigger bank account after you've got autonomy, it gets tougher and tougher and tougher to get a return on more and more and more and more money. I don't know. I mean, I haven't hit the $100 million mark, so maybe I'm freaking wrong. Maybe there's a lot of happiness at the
No,
hundred
because I've
million
I
mark,
have friends that have exited
but
their company for over $100 million. I
yeah,
have not, but I have good friends, and I mean I don't see their lifestyle being significantly different than somebody who has exited their company for 20 or 30 or 40 mil. I mean, these are all large sums of money for the average person. Uh, but I mean, for most people, I've had this conversation. There's a great finance YouTuber, Vivian too, and we're talking about like, what's your number? And she's like, her handle's like the Rich BFF or something like that. She creates a whole bunch of finance, kind of like this stuff.
hmm
And I had her on the show and I was asking her what's her number, and she's like, it's 20 million, because 20 million, if I invest it in very low risk, I can maybe get 4 to 5% back from that annually, and then I'm running at $1 million every single year. And I
yeah,
mean, that's a fabulous amount of money. Because think about the things that people want. They want vacations. They want to stay in luxury resorts. Most people don't care about like buying a sports team or owning a private island or yeah, maybe with $1 million a year, by the way, you can fly private. You wouldn't own your own jet, but you'd fly private if you really
yeah.
care about that. So you can have a private chef, you can have a gardener. I mean, that's a fair amount of money for most people. Like most people's dreams are actually not that they're not huge. They just want to not worry about living paycheck to paycheck. Okay, maybe it changes a little bit if you want to own a beautiful piece of real estate in Manhattan, but I don't even think many people want to own a beautiful piece of real estate in Manhattan. I think they actually, again, they're optimizing for their family, their quality of life, their freedom. So
Well, it's a
that's
thoughtful
yeah,
question. It's
yeah,
a thoughtful question because I've thought a lot about that, that meaning of or definition of success a lot.
yeah.
Um, when I was younger, probably 21, 22 years old, I listened to a really cool audio series that was on cassette tape from Earl Nightingale called Lead the Field. And he had an
Mm,
interesting definition for success that I held on to for a lot of years. It said, it was kind of wordy. He said, success is the progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal. And that was kind of a mouthful. At age 21, I had to think a lot about what that might mean. As I've gotten older, I've kind of gravitated towards something I actually heard in church when I was even younger than that. It just never really sunk in was, to fulfill the measure of your creation and enjoy it, find joy in that. A bicycle is not successful until it's assembled and ridden by a child. An apple seed is not successful till it's planted, nurtured, grows into an apple tree and bears fruit in its kind. And as I've thought about that gap between, what I am now and that frustration of that gap of where I could be, um, the pursuit of closing that gap to be who to fulfill potential. you
mhm.
know, I think one of the saddest things is where, I had a friend of mine give me kind of a strange compliment. He was recommending that I work with someone, and he told this so and so. He says, and this is years ago. He says, Andy, now there's a guy. There's anyone that has potential, has been fulfilled. It's that guy. And he meant it as a compliment, but then when it came in, he says, "Oh, I think that came the wrong way," But it's an important thing to think about. Let's. I'd be remiss. This is a bit out of order, but if I'd remiss if I didn't talk about this. In a way, I think it'd be easier to be an entrepreneur. You talked about getting a return on your ad spend, the term
Mm,
ROAS you used earlier. I think it's yes and no. I think it's easier in a lot of ways to be an entrepreneur in our day and age than maybe any other time we've ever had.
I agree.
Um, the technology to communicate, to deliver information, logistically to deliver products and services. I had a dear relative who had a degree in computer science, spent 30 years of his career, trying to figure out the code that he could sell, the software he could build, the app he could come up with, to make it happen. And has a divorce, loses, those are painful emotionally and financially. And right towards the age of retirement, he goes to Amazon, buys a pumice stone that's on the end of a stick, acquires some rights to that, and it's a toilet scrubber. And the guy winds up selling his Amazon business for all this cash where he can now retire and live off in the sunset. And I said, when you're in your computer science class, did you ever think you'd make your fortune with a pumice stone, a rock on the end of a stick that cleans toilets? It's amazing.
It is amazing.
The world we live in has opportunity. With that said, AI is kind of a game changer, and it's there's more competition now. So ease of access means more people are going to, throw their hat in the ring of entrepreneurship. What's your take? Your background's technology. How's AI going to change this for entrepreneurs? Is it going to consolidate around the big guys, and the big guys are just going to make more, or does the little guy still have a shot?
I think the little guy always has a shot. So a couple ideas on this for sure. One of my favorite graphs that I look at is a graph, and you can go search this on Google and you'll find it. It's a graph that shows the amount of people required to build $1 million company over time. And if you go back to say 1950, maybe I'm making up these numbers, maybe it's 30 or 40 or 50 people. But if you fast forward, then you look at 2024, to build $1 million company, it only takes one person. And I think that the barrier to entry for entrepreneurship has never been lower. which is great, like you mentioned, that allows anybody to build. And with no code tools and AI, even non-technical people can build technical products. Fabulous. Now, you asked, well, what about the big guys? Are they just going to create all these solutions? And the answer is no, because even with access to no code tools and all these AI tools and platforms, the one thing that big companies will never do is move as fast as early stage entrepreneurs or take as many risks as early stage entrepreneurs or build a culture of innovation like early stage entrepreneurs. So the life cycle of entrepreneurship is small company starts to build something. Maybe it could be one person building, coding, developing. It grows, it makes some money, it grows some more, it makes some more money, it starts to get some bloat. It could either be acquired or, and sometimes when it's acquired, it's killed, which is a totally different conversation. And there's reasons for why companies don't acquire properly. But if it keeps growing, keeps getting bloated, and then eventually it will no longer be nimble enough to bring new products and solutions to market as quickly as, again, that one solo entrepreneur building at home in their parents' basement. So the cycle of entrepreneurship, the barriers to entry have never been lower. But again, you should still build, not because you should still build because, of course, you have the opportunity. The barriers to entry are lower. There will be competition, but you will always have the opportunity to build something innovative that's solving a true pain point, and you can usually do it much quicker than a large company. So that's why when an entrepreneur builds a solution that it would make sense that Meta or Google or Amazon would just build, and investors will say, well, how do I know that Meta or Google or Amazon, they're not just going to build that thing and then they're going to make you completely irrelevant? Because it will take them 2 to 5 years to build it. And you can build it in 2, 3, 4, 5 months. And also, the thing is that the type of employee that gravitates towards a large company,
Great point.
a collective group of them over time will be able to build it. But companies know that if they want to have the best talent, they are actually going to acquire the innovators that are trying to break things that have built solutions. So maybe it's an acqui-hire. Maybe they just want you as an entrepreneur into their organization, and building that thing that makes $1 million per year in Google's eyes is nothing, but it's your resume. It's your application to become a VP at Google, pulling a $5 million per year salary and working on innovative products. So I think that there's always an argument to be made for somebody to build something. So
Fantastic stuff. How do we find your podcast, and tell us a little bit about how people can
yeah,
like, subscribe, and learn from these stories. I think you've got one of the greatest jobs in the world. I mentioned
I
before the
agree.
show. I mentioned before we started the show. I was like, I didn't want to do a podcast. I was like, oh, gee, that's just another thing to do. The learning. I mean, it's been better. It's been the best school I've ever been to.
Amen. Yeah.
Learning from people that from all walks of life, from academia, from business, the investing world. It's just been a incredible education. So how can people listen to what you do and stay in touch with you?
Yeah, it's very easy. So successstorypodcast.com, you'll see all the audio links, Spotify, Apple, YouTube's on there too. We got a channel. And then all the social is at Scott D Clary. And I talk about entrepreneurship, mindset. Basically, if you just like more of what we just riffed off of for the past 30, 40 minutes, then you'll like my content. So
Yeah, I mean, you find people you'd like to go to dinner with and just pick their
yeah,
brain forever, and that's what's nice about guys that will share and will broadcast, and not only your story but all of those success stories. That there's little nuggets. I had several today. The
good.
idea that the little guy is always in there, the idea
Yeah,
that you've got to find a passion, stick with it, the idea that there's a freedom, that you're seeking, that's probably you find that's worth more than any material stuff. And there's so much great content in there. So I thank you so much. You've been,
my
and
pleasure.
hang out just for a bit so I can thank you properly after the show. You've been watching and listening to the Cashflow Academy podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner. It's where we do our best to make this stuff simple. And don't forget to like and subscribe, hit your notification bell, and drop by yourinvestingclass.com for free goodies and all things investing education. Hope you enjoyed our conversation today. We'll see you next time.